Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the 6GB GTX 1060 and 8GB RX 580 are often compared to each other, and it's always interesting to see how the cards handle gaming as the years go on. A less common side-by-side analysis is one that features the cut down version of each card, namely the 3GB 1060 and 4GB 580. That's what we'll be doing today. As you probably know by now, the 3GB 1060 didn't just lose half its VRAM, it also has less cores. At launch, some argued it should have been called something different entirely. I had one in my personal gaming rig a while back, and it was more than enough for all of my 1080p gaming needs. This was over half a decade ago though. The 4GB 580 on the other hand is a lot more straightforward on paper. It's just that, a 580 with 4GB of GDDR5 memory. At launch you could save money on both this and the 1060 by opting for the lower VRAM variant versions, but in 2024 prices can be a bit more negligible. It depends on where you live, but here in the UK I've seen both full fat cards selling for £10 to £20 more than their cut down counterparts. A small price to pay for more VRAM related peace of mind. Today isn't about them though, it's about these. So let's get into the side by side results. Our first title then is Baldur's Gate 3. I ended up going for low for the sake of the 3GB 1060 I think, and here with SMAA also enabled we saw 72 FPS for the 1060 and 80 FPS for the 580. The percentile lows were actually a lot better with the 3GB 1060 at 60 and 48 respectively, whereas the 580 saw a few issues with consistency here, as you can see by the on-screen percentile figures. Next up we have Cyberpunk 2077, and neither card could hit 60 FPS with the lowest settings. They could definitely both use some help from FSR here, but I've left it off for comparison's sake today. Now it's clear that the 580 did come very close with an average of 59, a 1% low of 47 and a 0.1% low of 43 also accompanied that figure. The 1060 hit 52 FPS with slightly reduced percentile lows reading 40 and 33 respectively, so again I think it's playable in both cases, and overall the gameplay was quite consistent for both cards too, though the 3GB 1060 will suffer a bit more, especially in and around those busier areas. Next up we have Forza Horizon 5, which is often quite easy to run on a wide range of hardware. I consider it very well optimised, and here that's clear to see with the average frame rates at least. A smaller gap between the two cards here, 79 for the 1060 and 83 for the 580, where things are even harder to tell apart are with the percentile lows, which came in at 65 for the 1060, 64 for the 580, and that 0.1% figure was 26 with the 1060 and 25 with the 580. So yeah, very close here. There are going to be problems with both. We got a VRAM warning flash up for both, and you could definitely do with reducing the settings here, to be honest, because the average will be good, but where it lacks gameplay wise is with the overall consistency, and arguably that can be more important than having a high frame rate. Grand Theft Auto 5 is up next, and in this case the 1060 won this side by side with 93 FPS on average compared to 81 that the 580 offered, so it's definitely a clearer win here, a huge margin at least in terms of that average FPS. When it comes down to those percentile lows though, things were very similar. Again, playable on both, that's for sure, but there may be a few dips and drops here and there. The advanced graphics were also set to maximum, MSAA was off, and instead we had FXAA enabled to deal with some of those jagged edges. This may be the only victory for the 1060, but who knows, this may be a turning point for the 3GB card. Or maybe not. In Red Dead Redemption 2, with the high textures and everything else set to medium, with the geometry LOD set to max, the grass LOD set to 2 out of 10 and TAA also set to medium, we saw 52 frames per second for the 3GB 1060. A very playable result when you consider those percentile lows, which came in at 46 and 44. For the 584GB we saw over 60 FPS, coming in at 67 on average. Again, the percentile lows were really good, 56 and 54, which does point to consistency. The 3GB 1060 actually gave us a low video memory warning, whereas the 580 didn't. I think we could probably push the textures to ultra on the 580 as well, whereas we were stuck with high for the 3GB 1060. Now, I like to try Starfield because of how demanding it is, and it didn't really make much of a difference between the two cards here. The average was close to 30 on the 1060 3GB, and it was 30 on the 580 4GB, but to me, this doesn't feel very good. It doesn't look very good either, considering we're having to use the lowest in-game settings for both cards. This is too much to handle for both of these aging GPUs. A good effort, but not quite doable. Let's finalise then with The Witcher 3. This has the next gen patch applied and we are running in DX12 mode. Here with the high settings, or the high preset with TAA enabled, we saw 67 FPS for the 1060 3GB, a very nice effort indeed. The percentile lows were also pretty solid at 53 and 44. The 580 once again pulled ahead with 71 FPS, so not by a huge margin, and those percentile figures were also improved, again not by a massive amount, but it is noticeable, especially when you're running around cities and towns, for example. So good effort from both, but the 580 pulled ahead here a little bit. There we have it. All the results apart from GTA 5 fell in favour of the 4GB RX 580. As I said before, both this and the 3GB 1060 won't necessarily be much cheaper than their fully equipped counterparts, so be sure to check how prices compare where you live. You won't regret spending the extra if you have the budget to do so. That said, I think both of these put up a decent fight. Both will run into VRAM issues. In fact, I mentioned before I got a VRAM warning in Forza Horizon 5 for both cards, and this was backed up by the occasional stutter as represented by the 0.1% lows. It wasn't completely consistent though, that's not to say lower graphical presets wouldn't alleviate some of this. The 3GB 1060 also gave me a video memory warning in Red Dead, and we were also limited to high textures from the settings menu instead of Ultra that I normally use. Ultra probably isn't a good idea anyway, but despite the warning, the game still ran consistently, so I'd be tempted to play with some of the options from within the INI file. If power consumption is a concern for you, then the 3GB 1060 uses less, but neither of these are particularly thirsty, to be honest, and overall, if I had to pick one to use these days, it would be the 580. Now, some may say that a 480 4GB may be a better comparison. To be honest though, even the 580 4GB and 1060 3GB are very close in price here in the UK on sites like eBay, so I'd tend to be looking at those two if you wanted an older, cheaper card. As I said though, spend a tiny bit more and get what is a bit more peace of mind. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below, of course. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you all again in the next one.